Have you ever thought about how a single gesture of kindness can transform lives? Sometimes a simple act can seem insignificant, but it has the power to change stories in ways we never imagined. That's what Grace showed us, an ordinary young woman facing difficulties like any of us, who decided to act with empathy and courage, even though she knew it could cost her everything. By helping Jack, a homeless man, Grace did much more than satisfy someone's hunger. She rekindled hope in a disbelieving heart and, without knowing it, started a chain of events that would also change her own life. This story is proof that, no matter how small, our acts of kindness have the power to create great transformations. If you think that doing good is something reserved for those with time or money to spare, get ready to change your mind. Grace teaches us that it doesn't matter who you are or what you have. There is always an opportunity to help, and the fruits of this act can be surprising. Read on and discover how courage and compassion can open up paths where before there were only barriers. Grace was the kind of person who seemed to carry a glow of her own, even in the most difficult situations. Working as a waitress in a small restaurant, she faced long hours and a tight salary, but she never let this erase her empathy. One day, while waiting tables, she noticed a hungry man sitting on the sidewalk across the street. He was visibly haggard, with shabby clothes and eyes that seemed to beg for something more than food, dignity. Grace knew she couldn't ignore it. After all, who hasn't needed a helping hand in a desperate moment? Without a second thought, she decided to act. Grace's decision wasn't impulsive. It was courageous. She grabbed a plate of food from the restaurant and took it to the man, even though she knew it could cost her dearly. For many, it might seem like a small thing, but for that man, it was everything. Imagine yourself in her shoes. Would you risk your job to help someone? Grace knew that the restaurant's rules were strict and that her boss didn't tolerate deviations. But for her, humanity always came before standards. And maybe that's what we lack sometimes, to see beyond the rules and understand the real impact of our choices. Grace's gesture was more than a simple act of kindness. It was a powerful reminder that small actions can carry great meaning. How many times have we passed someone in need of help and chosen to look the other way? Grace didn't just see that man. She chose to see him as a person with a story. And here's the beauty of it. When you act with empathy, you can end up changing not only the lives of those you help, but also your own. Grace knew that her choice would not be well received, but she decided to act nonetheless. Her boss, Mr. Davis, was known for his inflexible attitude and obsession with keeping the restaurant's reputation impeccable. For him, the rules were non-negotiable, as if each dish served was a cog in a perfect wheel. When Grace handed the hungry man his food, she knew she was crossing a line. But deep down, she believed that kindness shouldn't be stifled by cold, impersonal rules. After all, what's the point of following all the rules if it makes you forget what it means to be human? The confrontation with Mr. Davis was inevitable. He called her into his office and, with a stern tone, questioned her attitude. Grace tried to explain. I couldn't just ignore it. He needed help, but her words seemed to hit a wall of indifference. Davis argued that the restaurant couldn't afford to break standards, and that acts like this could damage the business's image. This moment encapsulates a dilemma we all face at some point: follow the rules or listen to our conscience. Grace chose the second option, even though she knew it could be costly. This clash between Grace and Mr. Davis is more than just a discussion about work. It's a reflection of the choices we make on a daily basis. How often do we put convenience before compassion? Her dilemma is universal: obey the rules or do the right thing. Maybe you've already faced something similar, like when you saw someone being treated unfairly and had to decide between speaking up or keeping quiet. And it's in this kind of situation that we discover who we really are. But the impact of Grace's choices wouldn't stop there. Grace's gesture was much more profound than she could have imagined. For the starving man called Jack, that plate of food wasn't just sustenance. It was a reminder that he was still seen as someone worthy of care. Empathy often acts like a spark in the midst of darkness, rekindling something that seemed lost: hope. Jack, who until then had felt invisible to the world, found in Grace a reason to believe that perhaps things could change. Isn't it funny how such a simple act can carry so much power? A smile, a kind word, or a selfless gesture have the ability to touch lives in ways we can't always measure. The transformation began there, in that seemingly small moment, but full of meaning. Inspired by Grace's attitude, Jack began to reflect on his own life and the choices that had led him to that point. He realized that he needed to try again, even if the path was difficult. It's as if her kindness had planted a seed in his heart, a seed of courage and determination. And that makes us think, how many people around us are just waiting for a sign that there is still hope? Perhaps you yourself have been touched by an act of empathy that changed your perspective. The impact of Grace's attitude didn't stop at Jack. It spread like waves on a calm lake. Empathy has this power. It creates connections and inspires changes that go far beyond the initial moment. When we help someone, we are also encouraging them to help others in the future. It's a virtuous cycle that starts with a simple but powerful choice. And the beautiful thing is that Grace didn't yet know how much her decision would transform not only Jack's life, but also her own. Grace's courage, while admirable, came at a high price. Mr. Davis, furious at what he considered an unforgivable transgression, decided to take exemplary action. He called her in front of her colleagues and in a cold and calculated tone, announced her dismissal. The scene was humiliating. Grace, who had acted from the heart, was now publicly punished for her kindness. Many of the employees looked at her with pity, but no one dared to intervene. It was as if the message was clear. Following the rules was more important than doing the right thing. And there Grace was, without a job, but with a clear conscience. That moment was a turning point in her life. As she packed her things and left the restaurant, Grace felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because she knew she would lose her only source of income. Relief because she would no longer have to work in a place where humanity was secondary to norms. She remembered her mother's words. Sometimes doing the right thing costs a lot, but it's worth every penny. That's exactly how she felt. And maybe you've experienced something similar, a situation where you had to sacrifice something important in order to stay true to your values. Grace's resignation wasn't just a consequence. It was also a catalyst. Although at that moment, she didn't know what she would do next, there was something undeniable about her stance. She had no regrets. And that's a powerful thing. How often do we fail to act for fear of the consequences? Grace showed that courage is not always rewarded immediately, but it is always necessary to build a life in line with our principles. And as she walked out the door of the restaurant, without looking back, something unexpected began to take shape. Jack, still struck by Grace's kindness, felt he needed to do something to repay her. He didn't have much, just a few coins in his pocket and a newfound willpower, but he knew he couldn't let this gesture go unnoticed. Inspired by her, he started looking for ways to change his situation. The first thing he did was look for small jobs in the neighborhood, like cleaning yards or carrying boxes at local markets. It wasn't much, but each effort felt like a step towards the dignity he had lost. And it all started with that plate of food. The most impressive thing is how kindness creates a domino effect. Jack decided that as soon as he had something meaningful, he would make a point of helping Grace in some way. He didn't know exactly how, but he was determined to show that his gratitude went beyond words. It's funny how a simple act can awaken such a desire for reciprocity in people. Perhaps it's because, deep down, we all want to believe that good can still prevail. Jack wanted to prove to himself and to the world that he could be more than the difficult circumstances he found himself in. As Jack worked to change his life, he also began to realize something important. Kindness doesn't have to be grandiose to be meaningful. He began to help others in situations similar to his, sharing what little he had or offering words of encouragement. It was as if Grace's gesture had lit a flame inside him, a flame that now illuminated other paths. And as he traced his journey of overcoming, fate seemed to be preparing something even greater for both of them. He saw the way she faced humiliation with dignity, without lowering her head, and realized that he was dealing with someone special. For Richard, people like Grace were rare, those who put principle before convenience. And that was exactly the kind of value he was looking for in his team. After the public resignation, Richard decided to take action. He approached Grace outside the restaurant and introduced himself with a friendly smile and a curious look. "I saw what happened in there," he said, "and I want you to know that your courage did not go unnoticed." Grace was surprised and suspicious at first, but Richard quickly explained his intentions. He wasn't there to judge or offer charity. He was there to recognize her potential. "I need people like you in my company," he continued. "People who know the difference between rules and values." And that's how an unexpected door began to open for Grace. Richard's intervention was more than a job offer. It was a powerful reminder that acts of kindness don't go unnoticed by those who really matter. He offered her a position in his chain of restaurants, but not just any position. He wanted Grace to be a supervisor in one of the units. For Richard, her selfless attitude was proof enough of her ability to lead with empathy and integrity. And as Grace processed this new opportunity, she began to realize that perhaps her dismissal wasn't the end, but the beginning of something much bigger. Richard Walker's decision to hire Grace as a supervisor wasn't just a gesture of generosity. It was a powerful statement about what really matters in the corporate world. In an industry often obsessed with numbers, efficiency, and compliance, Richard chose to value something that rarely appears in financial reports: character. He knew that a company is not only made up of rules and processes, but also of people who have the courage to do the right thing, even when it goes against the grain. And Grace was exactly the kind of person, someone who would lead by example, inspiring others to follow her values. In her new working environment, Grace quickly stood out. Her story and her attitude served as a constant reminder to her team that empathy and ethics are not weaknesses, but strengths. She began implementing small changes in the restaurant, such as creating more inclusive policies and encouraging staff to treat customers with humanity above all else. For many, it was an innovative approach. For Grace, it was just the basics of what it meant to be human. And here's something interesting. Companies that put people at the center tend to prosper more in the long run. It's as if kindness creates an environment where everyone wants to do their best. Richard's vision and Grace's leadership defied the cold logic of the corporate world. They proved that integrity can be a competitive advantage in a market saturated by impersonal practices. And perhaps this is something for us to reflect on. How often do we sacrifice our values to fit in toxic environments? Their story shows us that it is possible to thrive without giving up what we believe in. But as Grace began to settle into her new position, another transformation was taking place in parallel, a change in Jack's life. While Grace began a new phase in her life, Jack was also on his own path of transformation. Inspired by her gesture, he decided it was time to rebuild his life, one step at a time. Jack began by taking on temporary jobs, such as carrying boxes in markets and cleaning yards. Although they were simple tasks, each day's work meant more than a paycheck. It was a chance to regain his self-esteem. He started saving what little he earned, determined to get off the streets and find something better. Grace's kindness had planted a seed of hope in him that was now blossoming into concrete action. Over time, opportunities began to appear. Jack got a steady job as a helper in a local warehouse, where his colleagues noticed his dedication and effort. He was grateful for every small achievement, but he never forgot who had lit the flame inside him. It was as if Grace's gesture had given him permission to believe again, not just in the future, but in himself. And it makes you think, how often do we underestimate the impact we can have on someone's life with a word or a gesture? Jack is living proof that even the simplest moments can be transformative. Jack's journey wasn't easy, but it was deeply meaningful. He began to help others who were in the same situation as he had been, sharing his story as an example of overcoming. His journey showed that no one is truly lost as long as there is someone willing to reach out. And as he continued to build his new life, Jack knew he still had something important to do, to give back to the woman who had changed everything for him. And so his and Grace's paths were about to cross again. Grace's kindness triggered a series of events that she could never have predicted. As she followed her new journey as a supervisor, she began to realize how small acts can create big waves. Jack, now at a more stable point in his life, decided to seek her out. He wanted to thank her personally and show her that her gesture had changed not only his present, but also his future. Jack showed up at the restaurant where Grace worked with a sincere smile and a story of overcoming to share. For Grace, seeing the real impact of his empathy was a deeply moving moment. But the story didn't stop there. Jack brought with him something more than words of gratitude. He had saved some of what he earned from his new job to buy Grace a symbolic gift. It was a small bracelet with the word hope engraved on it. He said, "You gave me this when I had nothing, and now I want you to never forget the power you have." That moment was a powerful reminder that good always finds a way to return, even if it takes time or comes in unexpected forms. We often underestimate the impact of our actions because we don't see the immediate fruits, but stories like this show that they always appear. The cycle created by Grace's selfless act is living proof of how goodness is contagious. Jack changed his life and started helping others. Richard recognized human value above rules. And Grace found not only a new job, but a new perspective on the impact of her choices. It's as if each person touched by this gesture has been encouraged to spread more kindness around them. And as Grace held that bracelet in her hands, she knew that her journey was far from over. After all, the deepest lessons were only just beginning to be shared. Grace, touched by everything she had experienced, felt she needed to share her story with the world. She knew that her journey was not just about her, but about how small acts of kindness and courage can transform lives. So one quiet evening, she took out her cell phone and began to write a detailed account of the events that had led her there. She posted it on social media without any great pretensions, but with a sincere desire to inspire others. "Never underestimate the power of doing good," she wrote. "Even when it seems that no one is looking, there is always someone being impacted." Within hours, her post began to gain attention. Grace's story touched thousands of people. Comments started pouring in, stories of people who had been through similar situations, thanks for her courage, and even promises to follow her example. Her message was clear: even in the face of adversity, we must never give up doing good. She encouraged people to look around and see opportunities to help, whether by offering a friendly word or reaching out to those in need. Whether at work, on the street, or at home, she said, there is always something we can do to make the world a better place, and this simplicity resonated deeply with those who read it. The impact of Grace's story was so great that she began to be invited to events and lectures on empathy and resilience. Her story became a symbol of hope in difficult times and proof that integrity and compassion still have a place in the world. But Grace never let it go to her head. For her, everything always came back to that simple moment when she decided to help Jack. And as she shared her lessons with others, Grace knew that her story was still being written, because every new act of kindness has the potential to create new beginnings. Have you ever noticed how small choices can have a huge impact? Grace's story is living proof that the courage to do good, even in the midst of adversity, can transform lives in ways we can't even imagine. Now I ask you, what are you doing today to change the world around you? It doesn't have to be something huge. Sometimes a smile, a word of encouragement, or a simple gesture of help can be just what someone needs to believe again. What if you started now? Who knows how many lives you could touch? But here's the crucial point. Don't let this be just a passing inspiration. How about putting what you've learned into practice? Look around you and find an opportunity to make a difference. It could be helping a colleague at work, supporting a local cause, or even listening to someone who needs to vent. Remember, change starts with you. And just like Grace, you never know how far your actions can reach or how many people can be impacted. Now tell me, are you ready to transform your life and the lives of others? If so, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to continue learning about how small attitudes can generate big changes. Let's create a cycle of kindness and positive impact in the world together. After all, who says you can't be the next person to inspire a story like this?